1550 BCE, someone in ancient Egypt sits down and writes the longest medical document that will survive from the ancient world. It is 20 meters long, 110 columns of text, 877 individual entries. It covers cancer, heart disease, diabetes, intestinal parasites, skin conditions, depression, dental problems, gynecology, and surgery. It is, by any measure, a remarkable achievement. And it opens with a prayer to the gods. Because in 1550 BCE, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in India, in China, the most sophisticated medical minds on Earth believed the same fundamental thing about disease, that it came from somewhere beyond the physical world, that it was sent deliberately by forces that could not be seen. They were wrong about the cause, but they were not wrong about everything. Welcome back to The Silent Machine. This is episode 3, 4 civilizations, 4 systems of medicine, and the long, painful, brilliant process of learning to see what was actually killing them. Ancient Egypt, the most powerful, most enduring civilization the ancient world produced. For 3,000 years, the pharaohs ruled. 3,000 years! For context, the Roman Empire lasted roughly 500. The United States has existed for 250. Egypt lasted 3,000 years. And for every single one of those years, it was riddled with disease. The Nile, which gave Egypt its agriculture, its trade, its identity, its godlike fertility, also gave it standing water, stagnant irrigation channels, seasonal floods that mixed drinking water with everything the river carried. The perfect conditions for schistosomiasis, a parasitic disease caused by flatworm larvae that breed in slow-moving water and burrow through human skin. It is still endemic in parts of Africa today. In ancient Egypt, it was everywhere. DNA evidence from mummies confirms it with remarkable frequency. Skeletal and DNA evidence from Abydos suggests that as many as 1 in 4 people in some Egyptian communities may have had tuberculosis. 1 in 4! The mummy of Ramesses V, a pharaoh who died around 1145 BCE, ruler of the most powerful nation on Earth, has pustule scars on his face and body consistent with smallpox. A king, struck by the same virus that would go on to kill hundreds of millions. 2 pharaohs, Siptah and Khnum-Necht, show the deformed equinus foot characteristic of polio. 2 separate carvings from the reign of Amenhotep III depict figures with the classic dropped foot posture of polio survivors. Disease did not stop at the palace gates. It did not respect the double crown. It did not bow to the pharaoh's divine authority. It never has, and it never will. The Egyptian response to disease was not superstition dressed up as medicine. It was something more complicated and more interesting than that. The Ebers Papyrus, compiled around 1550 BCE, though drawing on sources that are centuries older, is 20 meters long and contains 877 individual medical entries written using 328 distinct ingredients to produce nearly 900 separate prescriptions. It covers conditions from intestinal parasites to tumors to depression to trachoma. It describes the circulatory system with surprising accuracy, identifying the heart as the center of blood supply, with vessels running to every organ in the body. That is not primitive. That is observation. Careful, systematic, empirical observation. Egyptian physicians used willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, the active compound in aspirin, to reduce inflammation. They used acacia and honey on wounds as antiseptics. They used garlic, copper salts, and castor oil. Many of these compounds work. The Egyptians did not know why they worked, but they knew that they did. At the same time, and this is the critical thing to understand, they embedded all of this practical medicine within a supernatural framework. Disease was sent by the gods, or by the malevolent actions of enemies, or by the spirits of the dead. It was the hand of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess who could both deliver plague and cure it. To treat a disease, you therefore needed 2 things: the practical remedy and the ritual action that addressed the divine cause. This was not irrationality. This was the only explanatory framework available. Without microscopy, without germ theory, without any means of observing the invisible world, what else could you conclude when a healthy person went to bed and woke up dying? The Egyptians did the best that intelligence and observation could do in a world that hadn't yet found the right tools to see what was actually there. 600 kilometers east of Egypt, in the river valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, a different civilization was building a different system for understanding disease. In Mesopotamia, in Sumer, in Akkad, in Babylon, in Assyria, disease was not the hand of a god. It was the work of a demon. Specific demons, named demons. Lamashtu, who attacked pregnant women and stole their infants. Asaku, a demon of fever and wasting. Namtaru, the plague demon, personal servant of Nergal, the god of death and pestilence. Samana, a demon of red inflammation and skin disease. The Mesopotamians had a demon for almost every category of illness, and the cuneiform medical texts, the earliest of which date to the Old Babylonian period around 2000 BCE, are essentially manuals for identifying which demon is responsible and how to expel it. There were two kinds of medical practitioner in Mesopotamia. The Asu, the physician, who worked with herbs, balms, tinctures, and practical remedies, traveling daily through the city with a leather bag of healing plants, as described in the Gula hymn of around 1400 BCE. And the Osipu, the exorcist healer, who identified the supernatural cause of the illness, determined which divine power had been offended or which demon had been sent, and performed the ritual incantations and ceremonies required to address it. Both were regarded with equal respect. Both were considered essential. Because in a world without microscopes, in a world where a person could be perfectly healthy at dawn and dead by nightfall, the question of why demanded an answer that the physical world alone could not supply. The Mesopotamians named the invisible forces attacking them. They cataloged them. They systematized their responses to them. They were wrong about what those forces were. But the instinct to name the unseen killer, to classify it, to create a systematic response, that instinct was entirely correct. It is, in fact, exactly what we still do today. Here is something remarkable. A clay tablet from the ancient city of Ashnuna, dated to around 2100 BCE, contains what scholars have identified as the oldest written description of rabies in human history. It describes a dog with an unusual behavior, aggressive, disoriented, drooling, and prescribes a legal framework around it. If the owner of such a dog fails to control it and someone is bitten, and the bitten person subsequently dies, the dog's owner will be held responsible. The Mesopotamians did not know what rabies was. They did not know it was a virus. They did not know it traveled up the nervous system to the brain. They had no concept of any of that. But they had observed with clinical precision that a bite from a certain kind of sick dog was associated with a particular, distinctive, and always fatal pattern of death in human beings. They codified that observation into law. That is empirical medicine. That is evidence-based thinking expressed within the vocabulary of a world that had not yet discovered what evidence actually was. The biology they were describing, lysovirus, traveling through the peripheral nervous system to the brainstem, producing fatal encephalitis, would not be confirmed until the 19th century. They were right about the consequence. They were right about the cause and effect chain. They were just missing the microscope. Of all the ancient medical traditions, none was more systematically ambitious than the medicine of ancient India. Ayurveda, the science of life, is a medical system that emerged from the Vedic traditions of the Indian subcontinent over a period stretching from roughly 1500 BCE to its classical period around 600 BCE. Its two foundational texts, the Charaka Samhita and the Shushrita Samhita, together describe 1,120 distinct diseases. 1,120. By comparison, the Ebers Papyrus covers conditions in general categories. The Mesopotamian texts organize disease by its demonic cause. The Indian physicians classified by symptom, by mechanism, by prognosis, and by treatment. The Ayurvedic explanatory framework was built on the concept of the tridosha, three fundamental biological forces: vata, governing movement and the nervous system; pitta, governing digestion and metabolism; and kapha, governing structure and immunity. Disease in this system was the result of an imbalance between these three forces. This is wrong in the biological sense. There are no doshas. Disease is not caused by imbalances between abstract forces. But the framework has an important consequence. It led Indian physicians to treat disease as something arising from within the body, not imposed on it from outside by demons or gods. That shift from disease as divine punishment to disease as biological process is conceptually enormous. And the Sushruta Samhita goes farther still. Sushruta, working sometime around 600 BCE, contains the first complete clinical description of leprosy in human history. It describes the diagnostic features of the disease with remarkable accuracy, including one detail that would not be scientifically explained for another 2,000 years: that leprosy produces anesthesia, loss of sensation in the affected tissue. Sushruta did not know it was caused by Mycobacterium leprae. He did not know bacteria existed. But he observed that the skin lesions of leprosy had no sensation. He recorded it. He included it as a diagnostic criterion. That is clinical medicine, and it is as good as clinical medicine gets in 600 BCE anywhere on Earth. Let's be completely clear about what these ancient physicians were actually dealing with. Smallpox, variola major, a virus so large and complex, it was the first animal virus ever grown in a laboratory. It kills roughly 30% of the people it infects without treatment. It leaves survivors permanently scarred, and in many cases, blind. It spreads through respiratory droplets. In a densely populated ancient city, in Thebes, in Babylon, in Pataliputra, it would have moved through the population with terrible efficiency. The Egyptians called it the Wrath of Sekhmet. They had no other vocabulary for it. The virus itself, variola major, contains enough genetic complexity that scientists only finished fully sequencing it in the 1990s. The Egyptians had their prayer and their papyrus, and somehow they looked directly at a virus we could not fully characterize until the age of genomics, and they treated its symptoms, managed its spread as best they could, and cared for the dying. Leprosy. Mycobacterium leprae moves so slowly that from first infection to first symptoms can be anywhere from 5 to 20 years. The ancient physicians who observed it could not have known what they were looking at. What they saw was a person whose skin was changing, whose sensation was fading, whose extremities were slowly being destroyed. And they described it with clinical precision. Rabies, 100% fatal, virtually without exception once neurological symptoms appear. Caused by a virus that travels up the nervous system to the brain and causes encephalitis, hydrophobia, and a violent, terrifying death. Known to the Mesopotamians in 2100 BCE, not explained at the biological level until Pasteur's work in the 1880s. Almost 4,000 years between the first observation and the first explanation. That is the span of time these ancient physicians were working in. Not ignorant, not superstitious fools. Human beings doing the most rigorous thinking possible with the tools available to them. And those tools simply could not yet see what was there. Here is what the ancient world gave us. Not cures, not germ theory, not vaccines or antibiotics or anything that would have made a measurable difference to the death tolls that disease was producing in those centuries. What the ancient world gave us was something more fundamental. The habit of observation, the instinct to write things down, to classify, to systematize, to ask not just why is this person sick, but what pattern is there in how this illness behaves, who it strikes, how it moves through a population. The Egyptians understood the circulatory system better than anyone had before them. The Mesopotamians cataloged disease symptoms and created legal structures around contagious animals. The Indians built the most comprehensive disease classification system of the ancient world and included surgical techniques, cataract surgery, rhinoplasty, battlefield wound management that would not be replicated in the Western world for another 1,000 years. The willow bark the Egyptians used on inflammation is aspirin, the same molecule, different packaging. The quarantine logic embedded in the Mesopotamian dog bite law is the same logic that public health officials used to contain SARS in 2003. The careful clinical observation of nerve damage in leprosy that Sushruta recorded in 600 BCE is still used in clinical diagnosis today. These were not primitive attempts at medicine. They were the first attempts. And first attempts in the history of human knowledge always contain more truth than we tend to credit them with.
In 430 BCE, a plague will arrive in Athens that will kill a third of the city. In 165 CE, a pandemic will tear through the Roman Empire for 15 years, killing 5 million people. In 541 CE, the first great plague pandemic will begin, and the world will not recover for 2 centuries. The ancient civilizations we visited today did not have the tools to stop what was coming, but they built the language for it. They built the habit of looking, recording, and reasoning. The next time disease arrived in force, and it always arrived in force, there would be people who had read the papyrus, who had studied the clay tablet, who had memorized the Sanskrit text, and who would reach for them first, before the prayer, after the prayer, alongside it, the gods and the medicine working together. Next episode, empires fall. The plague of Athens destroys the greatest democracy the ancient world ever produced. The Antonine Plague brings Rome to its knees, and a historian called Thucydides sits down to write the most forensically accurate account of epidemic disease that the ancient world will ever produce. I'll see you there.